Hi, Claire and James here. Just before we get stuck into this week's episode, we wanted to let you know the exciting news that the Midlife Reset audit is now live. This is a first of its kind personalised diagnostic tool designed for midlifers by midlifers.
In just 3 minutes, the audit will help you pinpoint what's really holding you back from living your healthiest, happiest midlife, and most importantly, provide tailored strategies on how to take back control. Midlife doesn't have to be a time of uncertainty. It can be an era of growth, discovery, and well-being. So to go ahead and take the audit, go to themidlifementors.com/audit. In this week's episode, we have a fascinating conversation with Professor of Public Policy, Bobby Duffy, about generational myths and stereotypes, focusing specifically on Generation X, who are midlifers just like us. Bobby's career spans 30 years, and he's not only the Director of Policy Institute at King's College London, but the author of 2 books, The Perils of Perception, Why We're Wrong About Nearly Everything, and Generations, Does When You're Born Shape Who You Are?
We dive into the social influences that have shaped Generation X and the impact of being hinged between the baby boomers and the millennials. We also discuss how our values and behaviour differ from other generations, but also offers insights into misconceptions we might hold. This is an episode not to be missed because it's been recorded for us midlifers in mind.
Hi, I'm James Davis.
And I'm Claire Davis.
We're the Midlife Mentors, here to lift the lid on how to achieve health and happiness.
The balanced, no-nonsense way.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Midlife Mentors with me, James.
And me, Claire. James and I were just discussing what we've been up to, and I actually just gave him a very blunt reply and said, not much.
Hi.
I don't know what we've been up to. You've been prepping for your workshop that you're running, but I don't know when this is going out.
By the time it comes out, I would have run the workshop. I'm excited about that.
We've got lots of people signed up for that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm getting more traction on kind of my talking about my andropause and men at midlife, and starting to establish connections with people who are interested in what we can do to raise awareness of that. So that's exciting stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So let's dive, because we haven't got anything else to talk about as well, what we've been up to. Let's dive straight into our guest today. Very, very excited about this one. Would you like to introduce Bobby?
Yeah, so Professor Bobby Duffy is a Professor of Public Policy and the Director of the Policy Institute at King's College London. He's worked across most public policy areas in his career of 30 years, including being seconded to the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit, and sits on several advisory boards. He's the author of 2 books, The Perils of Perception, Why We're Wrong About Nearly Everything, and Generations, Does When You're Born Shape Who You Are, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So excited. And that challenges myths and stereotypes around generational trends. And today we're mainly going to be talking about our generation, Gen X. Welcome, Bobby. How are you doing?
Yeah, great. Great to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Great to have you.
Really looking forward to talking to you about all of this, because we talk about, our generation a lot. Obviously, we're the Midlife Mentors, Gen X. So it's going to be really fascinating to get your take on all of this. Yeah.
So first up, your book about generational myths. Can we categorize people by generation, or are we wrong to do that?
I'm a reasonable defender of generational thinking, but probably if you were summing up the book in one sentence, it's probably that generational thinking is a really powerful idea that has been horribly corrupted by terrible stereotypes, myths, and cliches about generations. So the actual thinking behind it is very powerful. When you're born does have an effect on who you are, because what's happening during your formative years and what you grew up through does matter. You take that with you. But most of what you see as generational claims about the differences or similarities between generations is nonsense. So it's a shame, really, because it's big thinking, and it brings in some of the biggest names in philosophy and sociology had a big focus on generations. People like Auguste Comte French philosopher, thought that generational change was the key determinant of societal change, the pace of societal change. So these are like big ideas, big ideas of life and death and how societies overall change. But the typical kind of headlines that you get when you look at coverage of generational issues is things like millennials are killing the napkin industry, or killing the Olympics, or killing marmalade, or whatever it is. That's the level of generational analysis that we tend to get in commentary in the media, which is a shame. Is a shame, because then you miss the big things.
Well, I guess the risk is it becomes like any stereotype. It becomes a kind of lazy shorthand, right? It's just an easy way to bunch people together.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's very, very attractive to headline writers, because if you say Gen Z, people have an immediate image, and it's it's a very small number of letters, and people have got a immediate image of that, what they think that means. So it's a brilliant shorthand for journalists.
Yeah, and also like millennials, when we think about millennials and what people say about that. So this is really fascinating to dive into, because also, as we are Generation X, are you able, Bobby, to kind of provide an overview of Gen X? Give us the kind of typical birth years associated with that generation, and what are some of the defining characteristics?
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, and it's brilliant to be able to talk about Gen X, because as you kind of hinted at the intro, we're left out of most of these discussions. You've got these massive cultural and demographic heavyweights of baby boomers and millennials either side of us, and they take all the attention, and basically Gen X just get left out. We're called the forgotten middle child of generational thinking, and it is kind of true. So Gen X in definitions are 1966 to 1979 usually. It varies by a couple of years here and there, but that's the kind of area. And I suppose we are, in many ways, we're a perfect hinge generation, because if you imagine we grew up not quite benefiting from the big economic growth and growth in private wealth that baby boomers did. So some of us did, but some of us didn't. So if you look at house ownership, home ownership, 8 and 10 of the pre-war and baby boomer generation ended up owning their own home. It looked like Generation X was going to race up to meet them on that, but then we had the massive price rises in early 2000s, followed by a crash and tighter lending rules and wage stagnation and all those types of things. So we ended up with about 2/3, 65% of Gen X owning their own home. So quite a step down. And then millennials are a step down again they've only just got over 50%. So we're kind of in the middle on lots of things, where some of us did okay in that kind of economic sense, but others, it was more constrained. We don't have the private wealth that baby boomers have. But then on other things like technology, we are again in between. When you look at things like social media use on different platforms, or technology use more generally, we are between baby boomers and millennials, but almost perfectly spaced between the two, in terms of you'll get 9 and 10 Gen Z are using social media. That's the youngest generation using social media platforms every day. It goes down to 7 and 10, 7 or 8 or 10 among millennials. Then it's down to like half, or going up to 60% of Gen X, and then baby boomers is still down at like 20-30%. So we're kind of, in many ways, we're a real blend of the generations around us that have a kind of crucial period in history where you've had big economic and big technological changes. So I think of us as a bit of a bridge generation between the two.
I just wanted to jump straight in here, because that's really interesting what you said about home ownership, economics, and also social media and technology. I just wondered if there was anything that in all your research that you've done and the books and everything, if there's anything around Gen X in how we think and how we particularly behave, if that makes sense. Because I know something that and this could be massive bias on my behalf, actually, that kind of whole self-development era as well. I think us Gen Xers more than the baby boomers, were all about like self-development books, doing the courses and all that kind of stuff. So that's what came to my mind. Is there anything else with kind of the thinking, maybe belief systems and behaviours that you see in Gen X?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably where it's useful to bring in the main framework of the book, which is this three-way split between what we call life cycle, period, and cohort effects. And it's the main way to sort the myths from reality in when you're looking at what's truly generational. So life cycle effects are you change as you age. You'll know this better than anyone with your focus on midlife, is that's different from, you have different priorities, different behaviors to earlier life and later life. So it's kind of life cycles are very powerful effects. Then you have period effects, which are fashions change, big events happen that shape people, whether economic crisis or pandemics, those types of things, as well as smaller changes in culture or fashion that just happen all the time. They're period effects, and they affect all the generations to some degree. And then you have cohort effects, which are generational and unique or more pronounced within a particular birth cohort that that they take with them as they age. And that's things like wealth. You can if you're born in an era with less economic growth or less wealth growth, you take that with you as it shapes your life to some degree throughout. So it's interesting on the thinking, kind of how we approach life. You've got to always think of it as a blend of those types of things, where actually definitely there's a period effect of greater focus on self-development and how do we think about our lives, and more focus on that, on shaping your own life and thinking about that. Whether that's a truly cohort effect for Generation X as much as a period effect of which other generations are also doing that, I think is a question. I don't think one thing that is clear from the data is a lot of people think that our interest in social purpose and brand values is a cohort effect, that's young people pushing that, Gen Z, millennials, and perhaps Gen X. But that's not actually the case. That's much more of a period effect, where we've all kind of increased our interest in values and the purpose of a brand or a service or our own employer. We've all kind of gone up on that scale. It's actually the older generations, older part of Gen X and younger part of baby boomers who are the most likely to boycott products for social purpose reasons or boycott services. And that's a bit of a life cycle effect, I think, because you're kind of, in a couple of ways, probably. One, you're a bit richer, you can take more, you've got more choice over. Young people don't have a lot of choice over what they can't buy or consume. And then I think you do get grumpier as you get older and more likely to act on your grumpiness. You know what I mean? You're a bit more sure of yourself. You're a bit more ready to take that type of action. And that midlife kind of point, it's still true that the U-shaped curve of happiness dips in midlife. So there is. I think those elements are true. I think definitely Gen X were going through their formative years when this was coming more to the fore with people. So that does tend to stick with people more. But I suspect that self-improvement, self-focus has continued with younger generations
Definitely.
too.
Yeah.
We touched on it earlier. I was talking. You wrote that excellent article for the Sunday Times in the run-up to the UK general election about Gen X being forgotten by politics, but it's more than politics, isn't it? We had this conversation that we're forgotten by marketeers. Like we're a forgotten generation. It's like, oh, baby boomers have got money, millennials are the next new thing, but Gen X just got left by the wayside. Why is that?
Yeah, no, it's very true. And I do think there is this, it's a mix of economics and culture, just as you're saying, I think, because it's kind of, yes, baby boomers have significantly higher spending capacity than previous generations at that kind of age. And so they are an enormous amount of consumer spending. But then it's different from millennials, obviously, because they haven't got that, but they are a very strong cultural force. And in particular, I think they were the generation coming through just as social media was taking off. And so they did all their kind of stupid things or mockable things in the full glare of social media. So all the overeating of avocados, having top knots and fancy coffees, all of that type of stuff was played out with memes and viral tweets, etc. That just wasn't subject. We weren't subject to luckily as a younger generation who did just as many foolish things or mockable kind of things, but it just wasn't kind of captured in the same way and shared so much. I think there is a definite cultural heavyweight aspect to millennials, and now we're seeing it move on to Gen Z, because marketeers are obsessed by youth and latest trends, and that is associated with youth. What's going to be the coming thing? It is interesting in the book. You look back at the history of marketing and how for decades people have said we really need to target more on older people because they are got lots more of the wealth, lots more of the income, but it's really not shifted that far when you do look at it. I mean, it has started to shift and it has shifted a bit, but you read articles back from the 1980s where they're saying we are now moving towards much more focus on older people. And then you can see almost exactly the same article written 30 years later saying we've realized that old people have got money and we're going to target more of them. So I think there is a bias within advertising marketing that as it's full of lots of young people, but also got that cultural interest in the latest, which tends not to come from older group. So I think it pulls it towards those, and in the consequence of that, we get left out. We're just like the boring middle that doesn't really attract much attention, which is that Sunday Times piece I did. They're not. Gen X is not massively smaller than the other generations, so there's still an awful lot of us, and we still have quite a lot of money. And it's interesting as well that a lot of the leaders in politics and business and elsewhere are actually Gen X. I think we are in the kind of prime leadership years. So in terms of power and control, we do have quite a lot of that. We just don't have much profile.
I'm hoping that's changing because I'm seeing in popular culture there's like an uptick now, I think, in kind of content being made that reflects Gen X. So we've had the Beverly Hills Cop movies just being the new ones come out.
I refuse to watch.
We've got Karate Kids, even things like Stranger Things were like a homage to the 80s. So that's encouraging. One thing I wanted to ask you, I think we grew up through a very pivotal time in history. We had, the Cold War, then the fall of the Berlin Wall, the reshaping of kind of the powerhouse of the world. It was the USSR versus USA, and now it's USA versus whoever. How much do you think that's shaped Gen X and defined us in terms of maybe economic or career challenges that we face now?
Yeah, no, it's definitely important. And we did live through turbulent time. Yeah. And I mean, I have to say that I'm sort of, when I talk to my kids who are teenagers, early teenagers, I did sort of point out, because they feel very hard done by, because it is, economically hard times and all those types of things. But I did, we did have that hold over them that they would, at least they didn't face nuclear war in the way that we did. We sort of had a real sense of that this could actually happen.
Well, I hope you said, try living through the 70s.
Yeah.
With all the
try being a kid in the 70s.
Yeah, with all the terrible fashion.
Yeah, but now they sort of have that threat of proper global conflict. So now they've sort of trumped us even on that. So they've had all the economic. So in terms of, I can't even say that to them. They don't know they're born and have that. I mean, I do think this is one of the benefits of writing the book, is it did, forces you to look through the different periods of history and realize that every era is incredibly disrupted. Like 70s were horrendous, but then post-war, looking at the baby boomers, I think we have to be mindful not to berate them too much for their good fortune when they were born, because for large periods of certainly their early lives, they were born in definitions 1945 to 1965, that kind of era. in large parts of that, it was not at all certain that things were going to work out great for them economically or otherwise. So I think every generation has these really disruptive shaping forces. I think if you were trying to characterize Gen X in some ways we lived through a period where which is sometimes called the Great Moderation, which was we were a little bit older then, but that kind of 90s into early 2000s period before the financial crash. In some ways, that was quite a good period. It had lots of ups and downs, but we did have a reasonable run in those quite important early career years, even though the 80s was really tough in the UK and for lots of people. But then it did get, so we have had, and the Great Moderation is really interesting because it was a quieter time of a bit less disruption. And then obviously September the 11th and all the things that flowed from that kind of halted that, and then into the economic problems that we got in the mid and later 2000s.
Yeah, it's interesting to say about the 90s. I mean, I do look back as almost like a golden decade. I mean, I suppose every generation does look back, but it did feel like a very special time in terms of what was going on in culture,
music,
for the economy, lots of opportunities. And something I thought about, I was a millennial was saying, if I look back at people who were 20s in their 90s, they could afford to live in central London and go out 5-6 times a week to clubs. They said, well, I have to live on the outskirts of London. I can't afford to go out once a week. All the clubs have shut. It's a very different environment. I think the 90s was a really special time.
I mean, we don't know whether that is the rose-tinted glasses because we were in it, but I do feel that is a kind of truth that we hear a lot. Added to that, they're living outside London and they're living with 5 other people because they literally can't afford anything on their own.
Yeah, I mean, the housing situation is horrendous for younger generations, and I think I said in the Sunday Times piece, or certainly in lots of things around the election, is there is no generational contract or brighter generational future without sorting out housing, really, because and that's not just ownership, that is private renting and social housing too, because we've just kind of forgotten that you can have social housing in some ways, and you need the whole sector solutions, not just individual bits. Where home ownership is a key part of that, because most of us have ended up owning our own homes, so it's really important. But it's been such an intractable problem, but so central in shaping millennials and now Gen Z's life chances, just as you described. And there's bits in the book that talk about how that I don't think you have to have rose-tinted glasses to claim that actually we were freer, because it wasn't the case that 40 or even 60% of our income was going on our housing, which is madness, really.
Yeah,
it is.
A pint didn't cost £7 plus.
Yeah.
It's crazy, isn't it? Like I feel like we're getting old, and I don't feel old, but I keep hearing myself thinking that sounds like something an older person would have said that I don't. I'm like, I can't.
I remember when there's all fields around it.
All fields around here. Even like a Diet Coke now is something like £5 in our local pub in London. It's crazy. But actually, Bobby, just if we could just talk about technology a little bit more. It is something that I find particularly, I suppose, fascinating in good ways and bad ways. But how do you see that that's changed? Obviously we were on the edge of that. We had pretty well the whole of the 90s and the early 2000s without social media. And I think that, honestly, maybe this is me with my rose-tinted glasses, but I think that had such a wonderful, freeing, positive impact on us, where we didn't see what everyone else was doing constantly on social media, where we weren't comparing ourselves, where we weren't constantly thinking, oh, I'm not enough or I'm not doing enough. What's kind of been some of your insights around Generation X and how that technology and that boom of tech and social media kind of changed us actually as a generation?
It's a really good point. And I think that hinged generation point is is really important, because we have engaged with it more, and it's shaped our lives more, but we haven't been fully embedded and properly digital native in the way that younger generations have, particularly younger millennials and Gen Z. They're the kind of proper digital native type areas. And I do think, I mean, there's obviously the mental health issues that is still a kind of live debate in the academic work about the extent to which social media or technology is the direct causal factor there. And, I think it's hard to prove that, but it's definitely something that you should take seriously as at least one of the important elements of the big increases we've seen in mental health disorders among younger people. I think some people can overclaim that it's just the issue, but I think there's lots more going on with young people that's helping us end up in that kind of situation. But I think the cultural points are really from a Gen X point of view are really important too, because so bizarrely we went to Fabric, which is a nightclub in London, for friends, party type thing. First time we've been in a club for, a club like that, so a proper club, for 10 years, 15 years. And it was just incredible, because they have a really strict policy of no photographs. And they put stickers over the camera on your phone so that you can't take photos. And this is a trend that's happened in some other clubs. I think it came from that big techno club in Germany, but and it changed. So we'd been to Ibiza and with the kids, and we'd managed to get to a club there, sort of revisiting our youth, and it was horrendous, the Ibiza one, because everyone was just photographing all the time and no one was enjoying anything about it. It was literally more of a photo shoot than a nightclub.
Actually, isn't it? It's actually
no one's in the moment. Because they're all too intent on trying to capture the moment rather than actually just being.
And it's something you're never going to look back at, really. Maybe once or twice, but you'll remember the moment, being present in it. I don't understand. Yeah.
No, me neither. I mean, it's because we didn't grow up with that. And it's just curating an image of yourself rather than actually being in that. But it changes everyone else's behavior around that. So the contrast between the Fabric experience, which felt like clubbing when we were young, to the Ibiza one, which feels incredibly alien to me, as I think. And you do, my kids do worry about being captured doing something stupid in a way that we just never had to consider, because no one had that sort of technology. So they are much more worried about getting drunk, or and drinking is, if you're looking for true generational changes, alcohol consumption is massively different. It's kind of like huge gaps where you get 3 in 10 or a third of the oldest generation still drinking 5 days or more a week. Then it goes down to like 20% of baby boomers. Then it goes down again to like 15% of Gen X, and then down to like 5% of millennials, and like 0.2% of Gen Z drinking regularly. Not saying that they're drinking a lot, but drinking regularly.
Wow, that's big numbers. That's massive.
That's a big drop off.
Yes, it is.
And you can see it yourself in the culture of Gen Z when they will go to the pub much less, partly economic, partly cultural. And when they do, they have very small number of drinks, or just stay on soft drinks or water. And it is that is a really big proper change, not a made up one, of very different relationships to alcohol that the younger generations have, whereas we're much more in the middle. So in some ways, when I say in the book, in some ways, I can't imagine being in a generation where a third of people are drinking 5 nights or more a week. That's a lot. But then equally, I can't imagine being in a generation where just about no one is drinking 5 nights or a week or more. So we kind of bridge we can see both. We're probably, we're more sensible on alcohol, less than our parents would have been at a similar sort of age, but not completely turning our back on it in the way that big parts of younger generations are.
Well, we saw that actually in Soho House, because we're members and we go backwards and forwards, and we always talk about the 90s. Well, it was late 90s, wasn't it? Soho House.
Friday afternoon in Soho House. Everyone was having their meetings, but with like wine, champagne.
Everyone, because I remember the media. I remember the media when we were there and kind of having those meetings and drinking on a Thursday, maybe a Friday. And now, like, everyone is nursing a glass of water. So they're on their laptops and they're having a meeting with glasses of water and they're cheersing, actually. Yeah. I remember looking very disdainful in our Gen X way on a Friday afternoon when they'd all finished their meeting and they cheers with a glass of water. I was like, oh, come on, guys. Come on, get the drinks in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, we used to drink at lunchtime. It was, a couple of pints at lunchtime was not at all unusual. And it's just, you cannot imagine that now.
I know, exactly.
One thing I'm reading a lot about is this. We talked about generational wealth, but we're talking the big transfer coming up as baby boomers kind of transition off this planet.
Yeah,
I'm just going to say, like, their wealth's going to be transferred down to millennials. Is what I'm reading. Is what do you see the impact of that being, and how's that going to play out? That's housing and everything.
Yeah, that's huge. So I think, like, the big economic story really of the past 30 years has been the growth of private wealth, individual private wealth, and that becoming more important than income in how you feel about your economic position. So how much your house is worth, how much is in your pension, how much you've got in stock shares, ISAs, etc., is the big kind of difference now. And then the second big trend within that has been that it's concentrated within a particular cohort of baby boomers, in particular Gen X to much lesser degree, but yeah, particularly baby boomers. And then the third element of that is it's not all baby boomers that have made it big by any means. So it's the top third have got the big majority of that type of wealth. So that points to the fact that it is going to flow down, but very unevenly. So some millennials, in particular, Gen X to some degree, are going to get a lot, and others are going to get nothing or very little. So I think the big question this does raise for us is, what's the policy on wealth taxation? And you can see that such a difficult subject for governments. People are very, very emotional and passionate about transferring money to their children. So it's a really difficult subject. But given the amount of it and the likely impact of that, the differential impact on it that's going to increase inequality significantly, you do think that we're going to have to grapple with how we actually tax wealth, not just inheritance, but a lot is passed on through bank of mum and dad. While people are still alive, they, huge differences in who can afford housing because of huge increase in bank of mum and dad providing deposits. So that, if your bank of mum and dad is in the top 10 mortgage lenders, if you counted all of those transactions together. So it's going to be, it sort of fractures the younger generation. So some know they're going to get a lot, and that does affect how your life choices, and some know they're going to get nothing, and that affects it too. So I think that is the big trend and question, and it's very pointed in places like America because of the belief in the American dream that you can start anywhere and make it, and it's increasingly the case that you end up where you start because wealth is more important, and some people have it and some people don't.
Yeah. As Gen Xers, that we're now in midlife, what are some of the kind of common challenges across the board with us Gen Xers, us midlifers, that we're really kind of concerned about moving forward? What have you seen? Is it the health? Is it the wealth? Is it the career? What are our common concerns?
Yeah, again, we're such an interesting generation for because we're concerned about lots of things, because we look in so many directions. So we were, for the Sunday Times analysis, you looked at what's the most important issues for us in voting just ahead of the election, and it was health was top, health services in the UK, because they're in a pretty bad state. But we are looking at it probably in three ways, which is our elderly parents will have a lot of contact with health services, and we can see how difficult that is.
Yeah.
For those who've got children, it's also their children's health needs. But then we've also got increasingly complex health needs of our own when you're coming into that period. So we've got a lot of interest in a health service that works, definitely. But we're also in the middle of career, or well developed in our career. We're still in careers, so we have a big economic interest as well. So getting the economy to work is still really important to us too. And then we're much less bothered about cultural concerns like immigration, those types of things. That is very much older generations rather than us that are most worried about the kind of culture war type issues. We're quite we are a squeezed middle in many ways. So we've got lots of pressures on us where we don't really have time for those sorts of cultural debates quite as much as older people do or younger people do in the other direction.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We always say it's generation squeeze. That's kind of like one of the phrases we use, like generation squeeze. And I think that's why, yes, we're in it, so we're kind of biased and we understand midlife. But I think that's why it's so important to us in the work that we do help people physically and mentally, actually, to kind of deal with all of that stuff. Because like you said, even the health, it's worrying about our children, it's worrying about our own health and the complications, and then our elderly parents as well. It's just a lot of pressure, a lot.
Yeah, and it is true that it still holds up. The dip in midlife in happiness is real, and you can see exactly why. Because all of those things are there's a lot of pressure.
Final question. Might be an unfair one, Bobby. Have you got any advice you'd offer to anyone in Gen X as they're navigating this midlife at the moment?
Oh, that's a great question. You're probably much better at answering that than me. I suppose I think having some pride in our generational identity and where we come from and all of that is really important, I think. And I do think we've got a lot that we can be proud of in terms of, and feel positive about, I guess, about our generation and how we've shaped things and how important we are in terms of culturally, but also politically and economically, all of those types of things. And it depends. I mean, it's a bit, we got our name from the Douglas Copeland book, Gen X, but he got the name from Paul Fussell, who's a sociologist in the US, who talked about the X people in America, who were, he talked about it in terms of they were sneaking out the back door of class systems in the US, not playing by the rules of kind of class system, and that they were intelligent, insolent, and ironic as a generation, which is a good set of words, I think.
Yeah, that's
great
for us. So I think we should embrace that type of it. We don't have to be the big behemoths and cultural heavyweights of millennials or the big economic powers of baby boomers. We are kind of our own identity of that. It's not a slacker generation at all, as it's often called, but it is more of a kind of insolent, ironic type generation who are trying to take their own path on things, and in quite a low key way. And we don't particularly I don't think we particularly mind not being in the spotlight. It's quite a nice place to be in some ways. So I think we should embrace that sense of we're not in the spotlight, but we're getting on with doing our own important things.
I love that. A sense of pride. That's what we have. Like when we talk to each other, we're like, yeah, we've got a sense of pride. I love that piece of advice.
Bobby, this has been so fantastic.
So amazing.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. I don't know if you've got anything you want to add or.
No, that was great. Really good questions.
Is there anywhere if people want to read more? Obviously, you've got your books and everything. We'll put those details in the show notes. But is there anywhere else? Have you got a website or anything that you could share?
Yeah, there's actually a website for the book called, I think it's just generations.org. .uk. So that's got some of the kind of data and short extracty bits of things that we have published around it. So do have a look at that. You can play around with the data a little bit. And I think there's a quiz on myths and think how well you know generations, those types of things.
I'll be off to do that.
We'll
put all that in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll pull that.
Bobby, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
It's a real fascinating chat. Thank you so much.
No worries. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. You've been listening to the Midlife Mentors with Claire and James Davis.
We'd love to hear from you. So drop us a line at info@themidlifementors.com with any questions or topic suggestions.
And make sure you join us on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can find us under the Midlife Mentors. Yeah. What? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. And don't forget to take the Midlife Reset Audit now to receive personalised insights into what's holding you back from living your healthiest, happiest midlife. So go ahead and take the audit now at themidlifementors.com/audit.